Welcome to This Leader. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and I'm so glad you're here. Let me tell you about a rug. When I was in my 20s, I lived in an amazing apartment by the beach. It was a very happy place. And in this apartment, I had a Persian rug. It was a family treasure. It's one of those pieces that just made the whole room feel like home. Beautiful, intricate floral design. But the way the pattern was laid out, it was almost like concentric circles, right? There was this cluster of flowers right in the center, and then a ring of flowers around that, and another ring around that, spreading all the way out to the edges, more or less. And I would look at this rug every day, and I would stand in the center of it, and it just was part of home. So one day, I was there at home with my dear friend Annabelle, and we were having one of those conversations. You know, the one, where you're really in it and you're just trying to get to the heart of something. We were trying to find answers to this question of what is the best life? Like, what makes the best life? And I was trying to explain this concept to her, this feeling that I was having. I didn't know any of the science behind it at the time, but I just said to her, hey, you know that feeling when you're fully connected and open, like your heart is open, you're seeing things clearly without distraction and without clutter between you and sort of reality. And I said to her, I think about that like being right here in the center circle. And I stood in the middle of the rug. In this place, you're completely aligned. Like there's nothing between you and your clearest thinking, your best instincts, your most connected, open-hearted self. You're fully present and uncluttered. So just hear that for a minute and tell me, do you know that place that I'm talking about? Those days where you just feel like things are so clear, okay? I know that place. And I know when I'm in it and when I'm not. And that's a place that I'm always trying to navigate towards. Because most of the time, I'm standing outside of that center circle. Sometimes I'm in sort of that first ring out from the center, or I'm just mildly off. Sometimes I'm in the second or the third ring out from that center circle, and sometimes I've lost touch completely with what that center circle feels like. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I turned to my friend that day and I said, I want to catch myself sooner. I want to know how to get back to that centered place and spend more of my time there. That feeling of just being really connected and open-hearted, I love that feeling. And so, my friends, I've more or less dedicated the rest of my time since then to sort of figuring that out. And I'm guessing it's pretty compelling for you too, given that this whole podcast is about being a better version of you, right? Because a better you is a better leader. And a better you will have the greatest positive impact on others. So here's what I've concluded over the years. I've spent a lot of time studying this and diving into the experience of that centeredness and, from a very experiential level and also from a neuroscientific level and all kinds of things. And here's what I've concluded. I know I can't live in that center space all the time. I have never achieved that. Life circumstances move me away from that center. Stress moves me away from that center. Hard conversations can move me away from that center. A bad night's sleep, poor nutrition, distraction, being overwhelmed, lots of things. But what matters is learning how to notice when I'm drifting, catching it early. Because the further I move away from that center and the longer I stay away from that center, the harder it becomes to find my way back. So, now, we have the brain science that backs this up completely. A couple of weeks ago, I did an episode called Stop Feeding the Beast, and we talked about the ways we rehearse and amplify our own stress triggers and how much of what exhausts us is actually self-generated. So if you haven't heard that one, go back and take a listen. Today, we go deeper because knowing that you're feeding the beast, that's one thing, but understanding what's actually happening underneath, what's happening to your nervous system, what's happening in your body, what's happening in the patterns that are wired into you, like long before your conscious mind even catches up. That's a deeper level of self-knowledge. And that's exactly what my guest today is bringing to the conversation. Lisa Alessi is a leadership coach with over 30 years of experience working at the intersection of individual growth and team dynamics. She helps leaders in local government, social impact organizations, and those who are scaling teams understand the patterns that are shaping their behavior and relationships so they can lead with more clarity, resilience, and range. And I'm so proud to call Lisa a friend because listen, here's the thing. Wherever you go, there you are. You are the common denominator in every room you walk into, every conversation you're part of, every team you lead, every family dinner. And if that's true, and it is, then understanding yourself at this level may be some of the most important work you ever do. I don't want to wait any longer. Here's my conversation with Lisa Alessi. Hello, Lisa. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Claire. It's great to be here.
So happy that you're here with me. We're going to jump right in. I got to tell you about something that happened the other day. I was in a meeting with a team of people. I was facilitating a meeting, and we really did need to talk about some hard stuff. We were talking about accountability issues and ownership of different kinds of things. And as we were getting deeper and deeper and closer to the center of this topic, I could feel and sense the people around the table having a whole variety of reactions to what we were talking about. From defensiveness, I was watching body language, I was seeing people crossing their arms and sitting back in their chairs, to anxiety, some people fidgeting quite a bit. I was reading it as that. I don't know if that's what they were feeling, but I was reading it this way. One person got up and left the room. Someone else started checking their phone. These are very common responses. I know this when we are confronted with hard conversations, hard stuff, we react. And you and I have had some great conversations about this. I know this is an area of expertise for you. So share with the audience and our listeners, what in your view, what is happening here? What is happening around that table?
Yeah, and we see this in teams and conversations all the time where you get this host of responses, and often what is going on is someone's been triggered. You're getting to the heart of the matter. People are feeling like a sense of ownership or responsibility around it, or they might get blamed and they go below the line, what I call below the line, or they're feeling some sense of anger, fear, anxiety, like you're talking about. And so, if we were to parse it out specifically, the crossed arms is often an indicator of the fight response, which is an agitation, their nervous system, adrenaline and cortisol is pumping through, and they're just feeling like they have to be in a protected, defended state to brace against anything that's coming at them, right? The anxiety, the fidgetiness, the shifting in the chair. Often you'll see people leaning back, sometimes leaning out of the conversation. I worked with someone who would sit as close to the door as possible to be able to exit the room. That is an avoidant response to the fight or flight mechanism getting amped up. Leaving the room can be they're in a real state of agitation or anger or frustration. Could also be that they're just shutting down and they know they're going to have an emotional response of some sort. And that's self-protective. They need to go regroup. They actually need to get a little space. So it's easy for other team members to turn around and be like, can you believe what just happened? Joe just left the room. We're in the middle of this conversation. And yet we don't know what's actually happening for that person. And the more that we can actually have a little bit more compassion and recognize in that moment, and as a facilitator, that the people are getting triggered. These are trigger responses, and bringing a little bit of compassion, perspective to it, as opposed to frustration and irritation and developing all these stories around it, I think is really what's most important.
Yeah, even to just say okay, let me just acknowledge this is a hard conversation. And I feel the challenge of it. Everyone around the table probably is having different kinds of reactions to this. And so let's just be present with it. Let's be present with that this is hard. And so let's try to keep ourselves in it or something. I don't know. So I do want to talk to you about how to handle this, but let's go back real quick because I want you to explain and unpack the above below the line concept. You just said that this may be this sort of reactions are below the line. So tell us more about that, above and below the line.
So I'm a big fan of having an understanding of where are you and where you need to go, right? So I use the analogy, we were just talking about this, about the mall map, going to the mall, standing in front of the mall map, and being like, I want to go over to this store or this area of the mall. And this is how I'm going to get there. So the above the line, below the line is a framework that helps you understand, where are you? Are you in the mode of being able to connect and really be able to be kind of creative and work with people, be more collaborative, open, curious? It's a state of mind, and it physiologically is driven through oxytocin pumping through our system, which is the hormone for connection. Serotonin, and all the happy neurohormones are on board. So literally, physiologically, when we're in that state, we are primed, our bodies are primed to actually connect and to try to understand each other. We can have compassion on board. We see options, possibilities. There's just so much good stuff. And that's where our teams and leaders do their best work.
Right. Okay. So above the line, open, curious, calm, connected, those kinds of things above the line. Okay. Great.
And physiologically primed to be able to connect. And then below the line, this is where our bodies are in that protect mode. There's a feeling of survival. It's a primitive, kind of primal instinct. The wiring in our brains, adrenaline, cortisol starts pumping through the system, and the brain can't discern whether there's actually a predator in the room or if this is actual from a social situation or the way we're thinking about it. And so this is one of the foundational things in leadership resiliency and in coaching and therapy and all kinds of domains, is recognizing that cognitively we cannot will our way out of some of these patterns of behavior. We have learned that just kind of thinking about what I need to do differently, if we had been able to do that, we would have eradicated all our problem behaviors a long time ago.
Okay. So it's not a thinking problem, is what you're saying. We can't think our way out of these states.
Fundamentally, we need to physiologically calm our nervous systems when we find ourselves in these survival patterns. Because what happens when you're in that survival pattern and the adrenaline, cortisol is pumping through the system, is that literally the blood gets shunted from the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that does executive function and has access to all the options and possibilities, and it shunts it to the core, ready to take action. And when that happens, we look at things black and white. We're like, everything's urgent, nothing's a priority because everything's a priority. It amps up our need to take action really fast, so we become much more impulsive. We need to control the situation. We hunker down. Or we may go into avoidance, like I just want to get out of here. And that's more the flee kind of situation. So we have all these different responses, but the below the line is just recognizing that this is your body perceiving threat out there. And if I can calm myself down, then I can start thinking about what I can do. But in that moment, nothing, you can't hear anything. It's like when you're having a conversation, either personally or professionally, and all of a sudden the words are just a jumble. There's nothing coming through.
Yeah. I feel like when you say the survival mechanism, I know exactly what you mean, but I want to tease that out just a little bit, because I feel like so much of this stuff is mild and moderate. Somebody wouldn't necessarily say, oh, I'm in survival mode. You know what I mean? It goes anywhere from like, I'm a little tickled. I've got a little bit of that hair on the back of my neck standing up. I've got a little bit of that flutter in my chest, to other extremes where it's like, I got to get out of here. Like, I think there's such a range of emotion, and I want to really contextualize that, because I think that most people that I've talked to about this concept of below the line, they think that they're above the line pretty much all the time, but we're not, right? Would you say that the majority of people sort of hover around the line or spend more time above the line in that open, calm, curious, connected place, or spend maybe a little more time than they would like to believe below the line in the place where you're a little bit on guard, you're a little bit defended, a little bit like waiting for the other shoe to drop? What's your thought on that?
Yeah. And I think, this gets at like the level of pain point, right? A little defended, a little protected.
Yeah, right. No big deal. No big deal.
And it always comes back to, what's the biggest pain point? What do you want to change? Because if it's working for you, then maybe it's what's needed in the situation. And so you can have some of these survival mechanisms in play, and they're absolutely needed in the situation because it's what the situation is dictating. So anger, taking command and control in an emergency situation where someone is very directive and being like, this is how it's got to go. This is what we're going to do. You're doing this, all that. That is a bit of a below the line response. That's stepping in to take command and to take the lead. But over time, it's appropriate. In a team collaboration, where there isn't that sense of emergency or urgency and you're doing the same thing, you are usurping the power and agency of other people because you are being directive and you're not getting them engaged to come in and bring in their strengths and all their superpowers into the situation. So, getting back to this whole pain point and crescendo and range of emotion, I think it comes back to a lot of people, high performing people, you and I both work with leaders who are very successful in their careers, have done amazing things. And when they step up into these advanced leadership roles, it's a game changer. It's different. And so we have a lot of strategies, ambition and drive and getting things done and moving things and shaking and momentum that happen at different levels in our roles and organizations. And then when you step up into a leadership role, you want to use those same type of approaches and they don't work anymore. And you find yourself frustrated. And when those strategies aren't working, then you're like, I don't understand. It used to work. Why isn't it working now?
Right.
And then someone might go into that fight mode or some of the other stuff might come on board because what used to work doesn't work. And it's like, I'm a successful leader. I make things happen and nothing's happening. And that's what kind of amps up.
Okay, let me see if I understand that piece. So you're saying that different strategies work at different levels of leadership. So perhaps, or is that what you're saying? Or are you just saying that maybe a person was utilizing more of that drive, forward momentum, and it worked to get them to a certain level of leadership. And now they're trying to rely on those same strategies, and it's a new group of people, and it's not working as well. Is that more accurate?
Yes. Yes. So I would say that sometimes the survival mechanisms are a way of managing situations and they work really well when you're in a management role. And then when you step into a leadership role, you're influencing, you don't have control over people. So you need to bring on different approaches. And they're trying to use old approaches, old strengths of like getting things done, results orientation, being clear, this is how it goes. And now they're no longer the one that is telling everybody what to do. They're asking questions about how do you want to make this work and get them engaged and on the bus with them. So it's a much more collaborative kind of approach. Very, very different strategy. And so it requires being very grounded, very centered, very intentional, very calm. If they're coming across with a lot more power or overdrive and intent, the natural tendency is for people to run to their corners. Then it shuts down communication, it shuts down any kind of activity, and people they'll do anything not to engage with that person.
Right. So I'm hearing a real difference between a directive style, which is appropriate and works in certain places, and a collaborative style, which is appropriate and works in different places. So, like, if you're trying to use the wrong one at the wrong time, it could be very frustrating. I get that. Let's go back to these above the line, more calm, connected, clear, with the physiological support of oxytocin and serotonin and things like that that allows that. Below the line, more defended, protected, possibly more directive. That's not necessarily the case, but you also mentioned fight, flight, freeze. I want you to tease those out a little bit. Like, we've all kind of heard of fight or flight response, but there are other responses that I think are equally important for us to tease out and understand, because I want to know a broader vocabulary and more visibility so I can be more compassionate when I see someone across the table reacting. I want to be able to say, oh, maybe that person is feeling anxious. Maybe that person just needs a break, that kind of thing. So can you tease out those different responses for us and tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think on the overarching thing is when someone is in a reactive space, right? Regardless of whether it's fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, those are the four that we'll kind of tease out a little bit, is that typically they're very concerned about something, they're upset about something, they don't know how to handle it quite the way they want to. And they're feeling a lot of emotion. And it could be a lot of different things. It could be anger, it could be anxiety, it could be, I'm afraid of being disapproved of.
Right.
Or I just feel a tremendous overwhelm. I'm flooded or I feel shame. Those are kind of all the four different kind of responses there. And slowing it down in that moment and being able to recognize that this is a person who's struggling in front of us. I think a lot of times when we're in a team meeting or we're in these kind of interactions, we immediately assume that the other person is intentionally doing these things. And then we create a whole story around what that is. And we don't even know what's going on. So fundamentally, like that's a big piece of like, if you can bring some compassion online and not personalize it, but recognize this person is below the line, use that simple framework. And how can I be a little more curious
Yeah.
and open and try to tease out what's happening, what's going on. I see that people are reacting. Okay, let's call it out. And you do that beautifully all the time. I feel that something is happening here. Let's talk about it, right? Like that is a way to be a little bit more explicit. But on the whole, a lot of leaders do not do that. They sense something, but then they don't know what to do with it.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times people just feel like it'll make that person uncomfortable if I say anything. It'll be more uncomfortable, maybe if I'm direct about it or if I ask a question or even if I sort of reach out and say, hey, what's happening over there? Sometimes people don't because they think it'll be more uncomfortable. I don't know.
Right. And my response to that is the hell you're avoiding is the one you're living because you're not addressing it. And that's what we call courageous authenticity, which is the willingness to talk about some of the things that feel like the elephant in the room or what's undiscussable because it's getting in the way.
Okay, so these responses, the fight, flight, fawn, freeze, I want you to explain the fawn response, 'cause I think that's one that is less familiar to folks. They look different, they feel different, but ultimately there's kind of a flooding response that's happening. And if we can recognize this in ourselves, then we can have some strategies around regulating.
Right. And a big part of the journey is like, so we've been focusing on other people. So you're seeing team members, all that, but you really want to focus on you. What's your response and how do you remain grounded and curious and open and kind of calm? But yeah, so the fight, real quick for just the four of them. The fight response is typically an anger response. The way it shows up is, or feels, is that I'm losing control of the situation here and I need to lock it down. And then your fight or flight system, the activation system goes into high alert, and that's adrenaline and cortisol is just absolutely surging. So you see people, leaders or people will interrupt. They'll try to take control of the conversation. They'll try to push a point of view, win the argument. It's of that kind of thing that you're seeing a lot of times. And then, like in the physical stance, you might see clenched fists. The eyes are really intense. People take up a little bit more space. They're leaning forward. They almost look like they're ready to launch, right? Woof, right? They see it. They feels like a saber-tooth tiger in the room and they're ready to go on the attack, right? Flight is different in the sense that this is people who see the tiger and they were like, get me out of here. I'll do anything to get out of this situation. And so they're trying to move away from it. They're activated, their adrenaline and cortisol's online, but they're, "Ooh, let me get out of here." So trying to avoid making decisions, having conversations, changing the subject.
Ah,
Sometimes you'll see people over intellectualizing things. These are all avoidant or flight kind of mechanisms.
what about like doubling down on minute details?
That would probably be more fight. Micromanagement to take control of the situation, to win the argument, to be right. I think that's more the fight side of the equation. Yeah.
Good to know.
Then fun, and we see this all the time, and a lot of us have learned this as a coping strategy. It kept us alive when we were little as kids, right? Is that it's the desire to maintain connection and approval because something's amiss, that you can feel it, you can sense it, and you don't want the disconnection. You can sense anger, you can sense someone pulling away, and you're leaning in. So the behaviors are accommodating, saying yes when you really want to say no, trying to harmonize a situation, even though it's really not okay with the behavior you're seeing in front of you. Or we normalize the behavior when there's been something that's like, that's not really okay. Like if couching, I'm going to think about how I'm going to say this thing. And this is where people are kind of like hedging. They want to say something, but they don't want to say it. And then when they do, it's not direct. It's very diluted so that it lands a little more softly on the other way. So that's fawning. And fawning is just wanting really focused on the other person and trying to maintain that connection, even though it's harmful in the long run.
Do anything to maintain that connection in a sense. I'm hearing almost like self-sacrificial a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow.
And the inner dialogue that can go on, if I were stronger, I would be able to handle this better. I must have done something because something's off the rails. I did something wrong. That's what's happening in the fawning cycle for sure. There's a lot of taking it on self responsibility and when it may not be the case.
This is my fault. Like, oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting. All right.
Then freeze. So, freeze is this literal shutdown. It's what happens if you've ever done a performance evaluation of an employee, and a lot of people will have this, and all of a sudden the person just checks out. They can't talk. They look disengaged. They don't have words. They get flooded. They feel shame, especially if you're giving constructive feedback.
Right.
Freezing, they sense tension in the room, and maybe they have been exposed to this in the past and it's been very, very scary for them. So literally, they just want to crawl under a rock. It feels very uncomfortable. Not only uncomfortable, it can feel very unsafe for them.
Yes.
So they go into freeze mode, and then they looks like they're just not there, or they're numb. It feels numb on the inside.
Right. As you're describing these, I'm thinking about situations where I have felt these different kinds of things, where I've done this, where I've observed others. And gosh, I'm just having a ton of compassion for myself and others in this. It takes it out of the realm of, hey, we're arguing about this subject. And it brings me back to a very human, hey, wait a minute. Whatever the subject is probably doesn't matter at all compared to what's happening between us right now or what's happening for you or whatever.
That's a brilliant observation. And I think that that's so important because the natural inclination is to close out the context of whatever, like the performance about, let's just get this done and lock it up and be done with it. But in that moment, what's really being asked for is for you to see the other person in the room. And you're no longer talking about the content of the performance evaluation, but now you're talking about the context of the situation. Wow, what just happened? How can I get some resources for you? Maybe this is consulting HR. We have services available for this. Are you okay? What can I do? Do you need to talk about it? Do you need some space? Do you need some time?
Right.
Just the human to human kind of thing. That's really what's needed. But if you don't do that, which is what happens a lot, then what we do is we power through it. We get to the other side and it remains what they call a rupture.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's a rupture in the system, there's a lot, their trust is eroded. People don't feel safe because what's really happening in the room isn't really being addressed. And then people don't trust what's actually being said because there's a lack of coherence, but what people are saying and doing.
Right. Gosh, that's fascinating. Now, I'm going to try to tease this out without making it too confusing, but I'm in the room. Let's just say we go back to the performance appraisal conversation. I'm in the room. I'm giving some constructive criticism. The other person starts to just shut down. Now, the compassionate above the line response that I may have is to notice, stay calm myself, lean in and say, hey, let's just pause. What's happening for you? Are you okay? What can I do? Do you need a minute? Something like that, right? So I want to lean in and make the moment okay. Acknowledge that feelings are part of life. And sometimes we have feelings. Maybe this is one of those moments. So let's be present with that. So often, I think, not to complicate matters too much, but boy, I start having feelings of my own. So the other person shuts down. And now I get that frustrated feeling of, hey, what was just working is now not working. And I may start to get flooded myself.
Right. Yeah. So there's a few different things there. So you taking that moment to pause and to name what you're seeing in front of you.
Yeah.
Maybe take a beat, take a breath, actually allows you to calm your nervous system down.
Right.
And then you're co-regulating with the other person. So literally other person comes down too, so that at least maybe they can come back online. They may not be able to discuss it, but you can ask them a question like, what do you need in this moment?
Okay.
And they may say, I just need a pause, right? I need to take a break. I can't talk about this right now. I'll need to come back. But what you're asking is, what can you do? And the thing is, pausing and taking a breath, the breath actually sends a message to the brain. Okay, there's actually no saber-tooth tiger in the room. We're okay. You're okay. It's all right. And then you want to widen your perspective and get curious. What's going on here? This is another person having an experience. This is not about me. I can have some compassion for this person, bring that online. And then it's not necessarily knowing what exactly is the right thing to do. Maybe it is acknowledging an emotion, but like it is just calling the humanness into the equation and then agreeing that maybe we should take a break and revisit this maybe in a week or something like that. But that is exactly the response that is needed. And the naming something to tame it is what allows you to kind of remove that inner dialogue and shame around it, which just like, well, if I were stronger, I should know how to deal with this. Or, they're reacting to me. This is nothing about you in that moment. This is about their response. And how do you show up for that person?
Right. So let's talk a little bit here about the self regulation techniques, because again, we can't regulate another person.
Yeah.
But if we can regulate ourselves, then we can create that context, like you said, the co regulation, where, like, okay, if I can stay calm, I can create a calmer context in which I may be able to provide comfort for the other person in some way, slow things down a little bit, whatever that may be. So let's talk about some self regulation strategies. What do we do?
Yeah. So the biggest thing you can do is start to develop a level of self awareness of what are the signs that I am starting to go down this path. Early warning signs, they're there. And a lot of times, what ends up happening is stresses accumulate over the course of the day. We get triggered, and then we're in autopilot and we're blowing a fuse or losing it on the highway with the driver that cuts us off or whatever. And that's all autopilot. And that's a lot of us. That was my story of like I was on autopilot for so long. It's a rude awakening when you recognize, oh, wow, I'm part of the equation here. It's so easy to blame other people for your frustration. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, no, I have agency in this situation. I have choice. I can do something about this. And recognizing that it's my behavior that's actually causing this whole thing. So, but the early warning signs, we were talking about the body being the guide, right? The body knows what's happening before it comes online cognitively in our thinking. So, what does that mean? Tension, your jaw is clenched, your shoulders are raised, your neck is tight. Maybe you got a gut punch feeling, the clenchedness, your eyes are feeling like they're going to bug out of your head. The fear factor, you're like agitated and you want to crawl out of your skin. All of those things are indicators, those early warning signs. If I don't do something now from a physiological perspective, then this could cascade into something bigger and then I'm going to lose it, right? Or if I have one of these reactions. So it's starting to just recognize it and then name it and then trying some different practices to calm down your nervous system. It could be breathing exercises, box breathing. It could be going outside for a walk. It could be literally making sure your feet are on the floor. You are orienting yourself in the room so your body knows there's no threat, no predator in the room. So literally, there's a lot of different approaches in every situation requires different approaches. So meditation, some people will recommend meditation. If you're super angry, meditation's probably not the thing. You need to discharge energy, pound the pavement, do something to get that energy out, right? So there are different approaches for different things. But in general, if you recognize tightness in your body or like your eyes are clenched or something, doing the opposite is very powerful because it counters the message to the brain that you're not in fight or flight. Softening your gaze, lowering your shoulders, relaxing your neck a little bit, stretching out a bit, whatever, the opposite. So you do that. And then anything you can do to reduce the chronic load or the accumulative stress. So a lot of times it happens when you haven't had a good night's sleep. You have way too many back-to-back meetings. There's too much on your plate for what you're actually capable of doing. You're really needing to assess the load and make some modifications.
Right.
And that might mean creating some space on your calendar. It could mean that you're making sure you're going to bed earlier the night before a stressful day. There's just so many different ways that you can reduce the load, but it is actually saying, I have agency here and I need to do this because it's not a luxury to do these things. It's a necessity for you to show up the way you want to show up.
Yes. Took me so long to learn that, Lisa. But, I always talk about this as sort of like big life things, habits, and in the moment things, right? So big life things to me are make sure you have some good friends, make sure you've got your people. You've got your people that you really can talk to. Do the big things. connect on a regular basis, go on your vacation, like take your time off. A lot of people don't want to do that, but it's like, do it, take the time off, have your morning routines, more in the habit range is more like have your morning routine, have your touch points throughout the day, make sure that you're exercising regularly, commit to that kind of thing. And all those things are the things that I always try to recommend as like, you got to keep stress at bay in life.
Yeah.
And then those in the moment things, like if you can do that, then you're much more likely to be able to regulate in the moment because you're not having to, like you said, you're not having to reduce such an intense stress load. I just know a lot of people carry this around and then they feel like, no, I can't stop working this. I can't take this evening off. I have too much to do. I have to stay up late and get this report done because if I don't, this, that, or the other consequence, and they're not necessarily indexing on the right thing there, where it's like, no, you're not going to be able to show up. You're not going to have a clear mind. You're not going to even probably be able to finish the report the way you want to finish it if you are overtaxing yourself constantly.
That's a below the line response when everything's a priority and you have nothing, there's nothing you can do. Feeling like you don't have any choice, that agency, that is all below the line. And I want to emphasize one thing that you said, all of those were great suggestions, but the need to be able to have your go-to people to talk to. When you're a leader and as you advance in different levels, especially as you go higher within an organization, you feel more and more isolated, like there are less and less people that you can talk to. And yet it is so monumentally important to be able to have people that know you, they're invested in you. They can be a mirror or a lens to be like, hey, Claire, you're right. That's really rough. Or, hey, Claire, you know what? I think you're a little off on this one. But once again, you need someone to co-regulate with too. Someone who's going to calm you down and be there to
Help you stay grounded.
absolutely, without question.
Well, Lisa, this is so necessary, so helpful. And I don't know if there's ever a time when we've had enough of this message, in a sense, because I feel like life is fast and kind of intense for a lot of people. Most of our listeners are leaders and people in leadership positions, and they're carrying a lot. And that self-regulation piece and the compassion for others is going to take us a long way. So how can people find you, Lisa? Where can people connect with you?
Yes, my website is renaissanceleader.com. So I have a website and just connect with me. All my contact information is out there. I also do a program called Up Next, which is helping develop leaders within the public sector and they're rising leaders within government positions. That is always something that I love. And one of the things that I think, just piggybacking on what you just said, is that this ability to have resiliency as a leader is so monumentally important with the complexity that we are dealing with and the nuanced complexity that we have. And that raising the level of consciousness so people are not feeling at the mercy of this is so important to me. And it has been such a big part of my journey that I feel like this message, the more people get to it, that the better it can be. And there is a handout that I've created to address a lot of the below the line, above the line, what you can do, which we'll make available.
Yeah, put that in the show notes. Excellent. Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been a delight. Go have an above the line kind of day.
There you go.
Okay, wow, that was illuminating. Remember at the beginning, I talked about those concentric circles on my rug that I told you about in my apartment by the beach? Well, here's how I think about what Lisa shared today. The center space that I was thinking about, the calm, clear, connected place. I think that's what she was referring to as being above the line. You're physiologically primed to think well, to lead well, and to actually be fully present with the people in front of you when you're above the line. And the further you drift, or it's sort of a spectrum, right? The more you go toward the line or below the line, the more your nervous system moves into protection mode. Fight, flight, fawn, freeze. And here's the thing. You cannot just think your way back to center. You have to regulate your way back. You have to use your breath, take a pause, take a moment to notice. And that ability to self-regulate, that is not a soft skill. It is the prerequisite for everything we talk about on this show. If you listened to episode 64, you heard me talk about becoming proactive instead of reactive. This is the deeper layer of that same idea, because the goal isn't to just stop feeding the beast. The goal is to know yourself well enough to catch yourself drifting early enough that you can find your way back to center before you've wandered too far out. You, my friend, are the common denominator. I'm the common denominator, and that means we have more agency than we might think. So if you're newer to this conversation, go back and listen to episode 64, Stop Feeding the Beast. And we have several other episodes on somatic awareness, that's body awareness, and emotional intelligence. All of these build on exactly what Lisa shared today. I'm going to link to those in the show notes. Lisa's conversation about above and below the line comes from several other resources, most notably a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So we will also link to that resource. But Lisa built a resource for us. She talks about it in the episode, and we're going to make that available in the show notes as well. You're going to want that. It lays out fight, flight, fawn, and freeze and what's happening. You can also find Lisa at renaissanceleader.com. So listen, if this one landed for you, do me a solid and go leave us a 5-star review. It helps grow the show more than you can imagine. And of course, I always invite you to share with another leader. This is the conversation more of us need to be having. So until next time, my friends, go have an above the line kind of day.